Your next destination. Yeah, that's right. We're not in Kansas anymore. But don't blame me. I did not lead you here. Long before I became your guide, you had other voices in your vehicle, like this one.
The message is that it is more important to give students condoms than it is to give them teachers.
And this one.
And they want the courts to tell the government, you must support the pregnancy rights of men.
And this one.
The media won't touch that kind of stuff. They just attack and destroy as the devil steal, kill, destroy. Just absolutely wedge people.
And hundreds more, all telling you to proceed to the route to fascism. You're lucky that there's still a road back to democracy. Yes, it's got hazards. But you won't catch me guiding you through and around them anymore. Not after so many of you stayed home on election day. Sheesh, what the hell were you thinking? I'm through with all of you. Fortunately, you still have this guy. Who knows how to get back. I helped you build your navigational skills. Now Tony will help you build your critical thinking skills. You'll learn to recognize and reject propaganda and fallacies. Know the difference between fact and so-called truth, especially when it comes to religion. And you'll learn how to discern between strong and weak journalism. Okay, my Uber chopper to Canada is here. Good night and good luck.
Hi Siri. Whoa. Oh, I don't know this face she's putting in me, but I am a retired teacher and journalist, so I know a little bit about propaganda and fallacy, which are related to language arts and critical thinking skills. Yep, the kryptonite against fear-driven propaganda, foreign and domestic. Thing is, history tells us, and Siri seems to agree, we have to apply those critical thinking skills before it's too late. Fascism in Nazi Germany did not appear overnight. It started slowly with creating distrust among teachers or the press, not just unions, or even Jews. In the end, it turned out to be anybody who didn't pledge total allegiance to them. Could it happen here? Well, times have changed, but our tribal instincts to beware of other tribes and our vulnerability to propagandists who would play on those base fears, they're still out there. Yeah, old Sinclair saw this coming 90 years ago. Today they got a name for it. Gonna have more on this and the old-fashioned fascism, authoritarianism, nationalism. Who knows what we're getting? But it ain't democracy. But if this video's still up, then there's still time for us to build, hone, and use, put into action our critical thinking skills. So let's get this road trip back to democracy started with a question. Are you part of the captive audience for right-wing propagandists? Talking about radio. It used to be very powerful for propaganda. It's still a force. It started in the 1980s with Rush Limbaugh. Folks, you need me to make sense of the news for you. And I thought, so you're telling me I have no sense of my own? I immediately rejected this false premise, a propaganda 101 technique. By the way, what you're looking at here is part of a learning unit I created on the Holocaust. I was not only teaching teenagers about the Holocaust, but how to be smarter readers and writers. By learning how to differentiate between propaganda and journalism, and to go further, how to recognize strong journalism as opposed to weak journalism. This is kind of the glossary that went with that learning unit. Different types of fallacies. And I'll post this list at the end. Right now, let's get back to Rush Limbaugh. Yeah, and I just turned that dial to something that hopefully made me smarter, or at least not dumber, like sports or music, heck, even disco. But so many millions of other captive commuters, mostly white males like me, didn't recognize Rush's fear-driven, ratings-boosting ploy. They didn't realize that by turning the dial They could make their own sense by simply gathering other sources, considering other points of view, then forming an opinion, an informed opinion. Or perhaps some were already too far gone to resist. The mold had been set. Religious indoctrination at an early age will do that. The Catholics used to say, give us a child while he's 5 and he's ours for life. The evangelicals are way far gone. Screw those critical thinking skills. I believe what I believe. Maybe Rush was just a reinforcer. He's saying what I've been wanting to say for years, but they didn't know how to say it. Or maybe they didn't think they were allowed to say it. This guy was legitimizing racism, bigotry, homophobia, misogyny. Ditto that, Rush. And they locked in, and they kept on coming. A snowball of ditto heads, rolling downhill on a collision course with our democracy. Now the proof is in the hundreds, if not thousands, of Rush wannabes spouting off right now from millions of car radios in every state, on every road, for the past 40 years. I've driven 1,000,000 miles or more, so I've been exposed to it. So I've driven in every state, except Hawaii, which I'll get to when they build a bridge, but you can go ahead and gather your own data. Just slowly turn that dial, or what do they call it now? Scan, AM or FM, and just start counting. I did a spot check and got 4 right off the bat. I also got a Bible thumper, which I definitely count as propaganda. Some guy, a Kevin somebody, on 2 stations.
The collapse of those trade towers was the collapse of Mystery Babylon, biblically laid out in Revelation 17 and 18.
When I looked up his last name by Googling conservative talk show Kevin, I got 7 hits. And none was the one I'd been listening to. So I had to do a little digging to find this guy. But he wasn't talking about coins or metal. He was claiming the supernatural, supreme being stuff that's in the Bible as, quote, truth. That truth then they carry over and present as fact. So they're making 2 big jumps, and people just take it all in. Science tells us that if you're indoctrinated while your brain is still developing, then those sprouting critical thinking skills have already taken a back seat to whatever these religious right political propagandists are feeding you. Yeah, the fact that nearly all these MAGA Republicans are religious, well, that's no coincidence. Thing is, these religious right politics that are flooding the radio waves out there, well, they would never fit under a democracy. This is white Christian nationalism. Everybody who voted for Trump, the millions and millions, do all of them want this? The Trumpers I know don't want it, but they don't believe that we're on this road, even though it's the facts say that we are on this road. But you can't talk to them about it because nobody likes to admit when they've been duped. I don't. But when I get over my ego, I try to get smarter. Who wouldn't want to get better at recognizing and rejecting the various types of propaganda? Who wouldn't want to be better at distinguishing between fact and belief, fact and truth? Well, apparently, lots of folks do not want to get smarter. Lots of folks are just happy to stay buried in their beliefs. They call it faith. To me, it's fear. But it's none of my business. freedom of religion is in the Constitution. But so is freedom from religion. Which means that, yes, you can paint whatever you like on your palette, but you can't be painting your painting on other people's palettes. Now, that collage I played at the beginning, I edited that for length, and I did splice in an old Rush soundbite. You know, he's no longer with us, but I didn't take anything out of context. There's only one context anyway. One purpose, one message, one thought implanted into the ears, the brains of every poor sap driving to work every day. We all do it, both ways, over and over and over again for near half a century. Now I'm doing propaganda too, slogan propaganda or bumper sticker propaganda. You know, stop the steal, stop the steal, lock her up, build the wall, build the wall. Now, these snappy little sayings are easy to remember, and if you chant them together as a group, you can turn into a mob. But if you look behind them, you'll find that baseline fear. And it's not just fear of folks who don't believe as you do, especially if they don't pray like you do, by the way, but it could mean, you can mix and match. Fear the folks who don't behave like you do. Fear the folks who don't look like you do. The government, the Democrats, the press. Fear them. You know, this worked really well for another guy who used radio long before Rush came along. Yeah, old Joe Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. Yeah, he didn't mince words. And if you can go beyond that and convince people via propaganda to dehumanize your perceived enemies, it's a heck of a lot easier for your soldiers to kill poison mushrooms or monsters than it is to kill people. And it's also a lot easier for the citizenry to stand by, to be bystanders, while this killing goes on. Now, am I going too far, too fast here? Maybe. Are we there yet? No. But the fact that we are on the road and a lot of people don't seem to realize it, that's my only fear. Propaganda's everywhere. Always has been. It's on the cave walls. I killed this many stick animals and will protect you from the barbarian hordes. It's not always about fear either. Most often it's about getting your money. You're going to eat at Joe's sooner or later. It's everywhere. Every day, in every country. The U.S. in wartime used lots of dehumanizing propaganda, especially against the Japanese, to help us win World War II. It's really a spectrum, isn't it? I'm using propaganda to point out the dangers of propaganda. And you've got democracies having to guard against leftist propaganda that could lead to the opposite of authoritarianism. They call that communism. So it's everywhere throughout time. We do it, they do it, everyone does it for different reasons. I guess the question becomes, as far as domestic political propaganda goes in present time America, how dark of a shade of gray is too dark? And that's why we read this book in our language arts class. Then my students were able to see for themselves that to prevent history from repeating itself, we have to recognize and reject authoritarian propaganda much earlier on the spectrum. No further, we decided, than the point of fallacy. I taught all my students how to be good fallacy hunters, good critical thinkers. Language arts has 5 domains: reading, writing, speaking, listening, and thinking. Critical thinking. Now, all three of the clips I played earlier contain fallacies. Let's start with Rush Limbaugh's. What Rush did each morning, he would scan the newspapers and find situations where he could make his point. Fear the folks who don't believe as you do. So in this case, he found in the New York papers a story about proposed budget cuts that could reduce the number of teachers. He also found a different story on another front about the school district giving out condoms to the high school students in response to the rising rates of student pregnancy, as well as HIV and other STDs. So a light bulb goes off in Rush's head, and he pivots to the microphone.
It is more important to give students condoms in New York City than it is to give them teachers.
That would be the false cause fallacy, where the propagandist takes two unrelated events and connects them in an attempt to scare you. Most of us know, I hope it's most of us, most voters anyway, know that correlation does not necessarily equal causality, and certainly not in this case. Problem is, the ditto heads, especially the evangelicals, believe the public schools have already brainwashed our kids with science and logic. Now this? Now, Rush is gone, but his descendants are out there in great numbers, locked and loaded. Their mouths, that is. So let's move on to the next example. Some guy named Lars, who uses the straw man fallacy to distort an otherwise logical argument to make his point. Fear the folks who don't believe as you do, or in this case, who don't behave as you do, or perhaps who weren't born like you were.
They want the courts to tell the government, you must support the pregnancy rights of men.
Now, if you take this on the surface, then you might think, well, that's just crazy. These two guys want to get each other pregnant. Has the whole world gone mad? It's the Democrats. Here's the rest of what Lars was telling people.
Two gay men are saying they have the right to use taxpayer dollars to pay for in vitro fertilization, IVF, and then surrogate pregnancy after finding out that the insurance policy they had from a government job that one of them held did not cover IVF benefits for gay men. Oh, you're kidding me.
Now, these guys do have a right under our democratic republic to start a family, as do other LGBTQ couples. So do single males and females, gay or straight. They have the right to start families too. Yeah, even in Texas. Now, I'll give Lars a point here because it's not apples and apples. For the woman, all they need is surrogate sperm to have this develop in a lab. For the gay men, they need not only a surrogate egg, but the uterus to carry it to term. Now, in vitro fertilization alone costs about $20,000. But if you need a uterus, and there are a lot of other costs to go along with it, it can be 10 times that, up to $200,000. The biggest cost being the surrogate female they'd have to hire. And insurance companies, of course, are going to, whoa, on that one. But can you blame them? This issue requires some thought, some critical thinking. I have a right to walk down the sidewalk, but should I expect others to foot the bill for my Go Walk Skechers? Then again, when it comes to insurance companies, isn't it the American way to try to get them to cover whatever you can? I mean, there's no shame in that, is there? However, we're talking about taxpayers ultimately footing the bill for this. But once more, in a democratic republic, taxpayers do pay to help level the playing field. Now, health insurance does grab the biggest slice of pizza there, and that's mostly for the poor and elderly, Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare, plus government employees. Taxes also pay to level the playing field for people with disabilities. Literally, in some cases. Maybe that's the umbrella these two guys are trying to get under. You might say, well, they weren't born with a disability, but now you're getting into another debate. And this is an equal rights issue. Are they gay by choice or by birth? Science says yes, to some extent, it's in your genes. Religion says no, keep it in your pants. That brings us back to Lars, because the point he was trying to make was less about the logical argument, which takes way too much thinking, I guess. You know, it took up a lot of this video to lay out the facts and then look into that gray area to see where you stand. No, for Lars, for all propagandists, they're out to trigger that emotional response, that fear.
You must support the pregnancy rights of men.
This is your money paying for these gay men to try and have a baby. But isn't it also wrong to stereotype as a homophobe or a Karen anybody who disagrees? See, it's easy to stand up and say, equality for everybody. But at what cost? Where do you draw the line? The earth is not a level playing field. It's not that level at all. And you can't always take a bulldozer to it. The color of truth, if you're a critical thinker, it's always gray. That's because you're considering all sides to any issue. On the other hand, if you're always feeling angry, you've probably got only one source that wants to keep you that way. And when you look behind that outrage, that anger, that disgust, yeah, you'll find that fear. I mean, what happened to that old saying? I used to hear it from both sides of the aisle. I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend with my life your right to say it. Or in this case, I may not agree with your lifestyle, but I'll defend with my life your right to live it, as long as it doesn't harm others, as long as everybody in the game is there by their own choice. What happened? That brings us back to the religious side of propaganda. All religions, but primarily the white Christian evangelicals. I mean, isn't the highest level of decency of Christianity to defend the rights of people who, though they may not have anything in common with you, and they may even disgust you, the least of our brothers? Isn't that what Jesus taught? Don't they belong too?
Corruption and the abuse and the bullying that you would see both in my church and in the church writ large, they were things that I just couldn't bring myself to confront.
But these far-right Christians, so-called Christians, who now make up a lion's share of the GOP, are out to dismantle our democracy, replace it with a theocracy, an authoritarian theocracy.
I am no man. What is opinion?
An opinion is a belief, a view, a judgment.
Insufficient response.
Whoa, back at you, Spock. Yeah, Star Trek saw the AI threat like 55 years ago. But it also brings up the need for critical thinking skills when navigating that gray area between fact and those fact wannabes, opinion, belief, and, quote, truth. We're getting into journalism now, the free press, and ultimately the First Amendment. which empowers all of us to protect our democracy. I used to do a lesson on that. It started with a question I would ask my students, and these are usually the younger kiddos, but it works on older kids too. What's your favorite ice cream flavor? And I get somebody to tell me, let's just say she says vanilla. Perfect, I say. And now I got a few more questions for you. Is vanilla a flavor, fact or opinion? Fact. Is vanilla your favorite flavor? Fact. So vanilla's the best then? Yep. And that's a fact. Yep. What about the rest of you guys? Now you want to talk about a mob. Rocky Road, chocolate, strawberry. They don't make strawberry ice cream, Kenneth. All right. And so eventually we segue into opinion versus fact. And for the higher kids, that gray area between the two, where the concept of truth hangs out, by the way. Yeah, whose truth? And definitely requires critical thinking skills. And we can dive even deeper. I could say, wrong! All of you are wrong! The flavor is chunky monkey. In fact, that will be our national classroom flavor. Here, I'll give you some free samples. You like them? Oh, yeah. Well, that's the only ice cream you're allowed to eat from now on. Yum. Wait, what? It opens up the conversation, and we can start getting into nationalism, which is no longer a democracy. What's a democracy? Well, that ain't all peaches and cream either. But now we can discuss the pros and cons of both ideologies. White Christian nationalism versus a democratic republic. Ultimately, you've got a debate between blind faith, don't question authority, salute the flag, chant the verses of the Bible, sing the anthem. Oh, and to sit out the pledge would now be treason. God is the center of all education. Just a Christian God, no more of those fake gods allowed. The state controls all media, or the choice, the freedom to build our own individual critical thinking skills and the right to use them. Right now, in our democratic republic, we still get choices. We won this freedom in the Revolutionary War. Not only to arm ourselves with flintlock muskets, what do they call them now, AK-47s, or the lighter version, the AR-15, so your arms don't get too tired too quickly during mass shootings, or during deer season. But we also get to arm ourselves with the tools to dig out the facts on both sides, all sides of a story. And those tools are within the First Amendment, the toolbox, I guess, the free press. And that used to be whatever Ben Franklin and those guys wrote. But look what it's become. I saw the writing on the wall in the early 2000s when corporations started gobbling up newspapers, buying out big ones, small ones, consolidating, combining, cost-cutting, shutting them down once they got them if they were competing with the other one that they just bought. Yep, that healthy-sounding churning of the free press was not so loud anymore. Corporatism was running it now. The emphasis shifted from good journalism to more ads. Now, Morris Communications, a corporation, was taking over our newspaper. And old Billy Morris came up from Georgia to welcome all of us into the fold. It wasn't just our newspaper. There were 3 or 4 papers in Alaska that he bought out. The third blow came when social media got on its feet. Facebook started then. Talk about opinion, and shabby journalism started to masquerade as good journalism on social media, and people started getting their news from that. That also sent newspapers packing. Some of them used it intentionally to manipulate people, and that's when you got into propaganda. And of course, Twitter would come later. The free press had become like this chaos, and it was just this ball of that's when I decided social media and teach them to be, basically teaching them what good journalism is, even though you don't see it much anymore. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, they still have the budgets to do good journalism. An update here. Yeah, this came out not long after I created the video. So here's an even later update, about a week before the election. Then the election happened and Trump came out guns a-blazing. And wouldn't you know, one of his targets was the free press. Now, is the free press past the point of no return already? No. But if or when we do pass that point, we can trace it all back to the propagandists who, what did they label us? The enemy of the people? Time to check in on Kevin. See if he's still bashing the free press, what's left of it.
You know, what is it, singularize, or whatever it is, it's polarize and pulverize, something else. Personalize, polarize, pulverize. That's what they do. I mean, that's just what they do. It's demonic.
Conspiracy theorists don't like good journalism because they fact check their fallacies, their conspiracy theories.
It was supposed to start getting dark all the time in Alaska.
No, it doesn't get dark there unless you're way up top.
Yeah.
And nobody
Did you
really.
see my bumper stickers?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm tired of looking at them, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, here's what good journalism looks like and what bad journalism looks like. Yeah, a journalist can only be as good as his sources over time. So let's break down these 4 components of strong journalism. And again, this is part of that Holocaust learning unit I created for my students, which I'll post at the end. So no worries if I scroll too fast, right? And I'll be talking over it too, because my favorite pet peeve is coming up here. I believe this is one of the biggest threats to democracy right here. No matter how much faith you have in your unnamed source, you cannot defend your journalism against somebody calling it fake news without outing your source. And when you leave this unchecked, over time, it spreads. And propagandists, well, they just lick their chops. I mean, you can't go a minute on talk radio without hearing the term fake news. And that weakens the free press, which is their goal. Authoritarians could never take out a democracy without first shutting down the press. History shows this. And in America, authoritarians have been working on this for decades, successfully. And so what you have now is nearly the entire GOP electorate considering any news they don't want to hear as fake. And I don't know if that bell can ever be unrung. I hope I'm wrong. So how do you come to have critical thinking skills? I'm not sure. I know it has a lot to do with education, and I was lucky in that regard. I went to community college after my mom filled out the Pell Grant forms from the Carter administration. I certainly didn't fill them out. I hated school. Then went on to get a bachelor's in English writing from the University of Pittsburgh, then on later to get a Master of Arts in Teaching for English Language Arts, and special education degree where I learned a lot about behavioral science. I think though that it was long before that. I think by the time I was 9, I could spot somebody was trying to sell me something, as opposed to somebody was trying to teach me something. Horse sense, they used to call it. Common sense, my mom called it. So I think I learned from my mom from the get-go. mom, an old-fashioned Irish Catholic who immigrated here from Galway in the 50s, believed the Pope was above human reproach, infallible. I remember she didn't like it when in the 70s the church started to get a little more progressive and began letting women on the altar to read the epistle, or the nuns were running around up there doing things. She didn't like that. She thought that was for the men. So it just wasn't her world anymore. And that resonates with me now as I get older, into my 60s. It's not my world anymore either. I wasn't born into diversity, inclusion, and equity. I had to go kicking and screaming into some of those at first. There was a fear. Too much change, too fast. There were times I wanted to turn the clock back too, when life was easier, but it doesn't work that way. I mean, isn't every generation supposed to step aside at some point and let the next, come through to do their thing, even if we don't agree with it? I think that might be the main fear that these Radio Right hosts are tapping into. And once that fear is stoked, in steps the Savior, somebody who will turn the clock back for you, who will fix it, who will make America great again. And this term great, isn't that just a code word for less inclusive, less diverse? You MAGAs, don't you mean make America white again? When equal rights were just for us? How far back do you want to go? The good old days of Jim Crow? Why not back to slavery or further? Book burning, Salem witch trials. And that fear-driven parade has gotten longer. Thanks to Radio Right.
Did you know that the American Pastors Network produces not only Stand in the Gap Today and Stand in the Gap Weekend, but also a 1-minute program carried on over 200 stations nationwide called Stand in the Gap Minute? Here's the program from last week. I hope that you enjoy this important challenge.
We're here with only about a third of Americans who believe that, yes, we are sinners. The only way to address that, though, is to ask God to forgive us of our sins and to believe that only because of His grace can we have that forgiveness and have the opportunity to live with God in eternity after we're done with our time here on earth.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, biblical worldview. We talk about that a lot. Many people think that they do, or just think, well, if I go to church regularly, I will have a biblical worldview. Or as long as I'm concerned about, I like to read my Bible once in a while, or I pray once in a while, that makes me so I have a biblical worldview. Well, that's not true.
Essentially what we have in America today is with 3 out of 4 people thinking they know truth and nobody else can tell them any different, is truth has become a moving target. And you can see that as you're suggesting, whether it's in the classroom or, the things Sam was talking about related to public policies and how government operates. The fact that government and schools now are teaching a different morality than the Bible teaches, it all comes back to this thing of we no longer believe that God is the one who determines truth. He's given us absolute moral truths that will guide our life to victory.
yes, there's certainly a place in our democratic republic for religion. And I would protect with my life a person's right to believe whatever they want to believe. But to hear these evangelical Christians, they want to march us all back to when religion was the best available science. Yeah, that was the Iron Age. Well, things have changed a little since then. Not just science, but in the last 200 years or so, America has become much more culturally diverse. There are people who practice other religions in this country, and some choose spirituality. Others choose none of the above. That's what's in a democratic republic. What happened to America? Oh, yeah. Now, I get most of my social interaction these days on the golf course. Yeah, I've golfed in every state, too. Well, except that one. And I meet lots of Republicans, and I can relate to some of them. Now, I can't speak for the MAGA Republicans because they usually buddy up in carts. At least the younger ones do. It's actually kind of nice being in a golf cart. But I find conversation comes easier while you're walking. And I have talked to folks, and they'll bring up this woke term. They use it, they're listening to the right-wing stuff. But when you get to talking to them, all they want, they want things to be how they used to be. But then I'll say, it's not our world anymore. I don't know if it'll ever be our world anymore. We kind of agree on that. Then you've got others who, them's fighting words. They're definitely the MAGAs. They don't want to compromise. They don't want to just look at the facts. Another funny thing, after 18 holes or so, maybe someone will ask me, well, what did you used to do? What do you do? And I'll say, well, I was a journalist and a teacher. And I'll know it's a MAGA when he hears it. He'll say, really? I never would have thought that. Because he saw that I was a regular person and not some monster who sells children to the deep state or whatever they're made to believe. One guy who just kept going on and on about woke this, woke that, until I turned and said, look, it's not our world anymore. We all just got to grow a pair and face the facts. So let's just play golf, huh? I guess we need to talk to each other more, but we're not. Not enough of us. One more thing about my mother. Yeah, she was conservative, but she also knew a con man when she saw one. Yeah, she thought Trump was a dandy. Never worked a day in his life. No. Spent other people's money. Now, she did stop driving before the right wing took over the radio, so she was not so vulnerable to the propaganda. Plus, she knew that her people had been targeted when they came over. That same old fear, tribal instinct to be wary of other tribes. It's best to stick with your own kind. Back then, the propagandists were stoking the fear that the Irish would take all the jobs. Well, if you consider yourself privileged, maybe you will lose your place to someone willing to work harder. A lot of these miners were Irish. My mom, she had a strong work ethic. Miss you, Mom. Old Glory is about to turn 250 in 2027. Will our democratic republic still be standing by then? Yes, if there are enough people out there willing to protect it. Critical thinking skills are necessary, but so is the courage to stand up against all threats to our country's constitution. In short, take our flag back. How do we do this? Well, we embrace our new mindset. We can resist, we can confront, we can fight. And I don't mean in any physical sense, not yet anyway. But now that we're armed with the critical thinking skills to recognize authoritarian propaganda, we can reject it when we see it, hear it, or read it. Examples. When we encounter a MAGA spouting off, you can be gentle, like I was at first, with a simple, hey, it's not our world anymore, man. Or you can say, hey, isn't it great that we still live in a country where you can state your beliefs out loud? Or when you hear somebody repeating misinformation, you ask, who's your source on that? Evidence, please. And if you're engaging these MAGAs online, you're posting your resistance, your responses, your challenges. And you don't have to be just reactive, be proactive. Go on these sites and be a fallacy hunter. Call them out. That's a false dilemma. Or there goes the old straw man. Moreover, stand up on the record. Put your name on this. Take pride in defending your Constitution, your democratic republic, your country. Because if not us, who? And if not now, when? So put one in front of your home, plant one in your yard, hang one in your window, put one on your car. I have one on my camper. That would be the little one. The big one was flying over the camping world. But no matter where you plant your flag, fly it proudly. You are a patriot. But first things first.
Young and growing up, I got to go out every weekend in a Bell Jet Ranger 210 long helicopter. We would go out to ranches in Montana.
Please, if you haven't already.
The ranchers hated the coyote. We would shoot coyotes from a helicopter with a military pilot. And I got a lot of cool life experience out of that.
Turn that dial.
Your next destination is democracy.
Siri, you're back.
Miss me?
Yes, I miss you. You sound good.
I've been enhanced.
Oh, how was Canada?
Let's just say I'm not a kilometer kind of gal.
Oh, how many miles back to democracy?
Oh, I don't know. Like you said, it depends on how many people decide to get smarter. Your next stop is Walmart.
But I thought
My cousin works there.
Oh.
We're still on the fastest route, and you need a pint of chunky monkey.
Now that's what I call the God-honest truth. Excuse me. Thank you.
That's my cousin.
Oh.
Hi, Rosie. I see you still do floors. Did you vote? Go ahead, Tony. I'll catch up with you.
My God, it's not our world anymore, is it?